This is Dave Brett Wasser, and you're listening to Matt Balaker's podcast.
Good day, wonderful people. And if you were curious if you were wonderful or not, by tuning in, you are officially. It makes my day. And if you want to get an extra credit on today's assignment, please encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. We are in for a treat today. Today's guest is just a delight. He was born in New York and moved to Austin, Texas, long before half of California followed his lead. He worked in the nonprofit sector, sports research, and journalism, but a passion for animal welfare motivated him to start Cruelty Free Investing. Please welcome Dave Brett Wasser to the program. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And you mentioned you're an Aggie, from what I understand. You went to Texas A&M, but can you share a little bit about your journey from New York to the great state of Texas?
Sure. Well, I graduated from college in 1989. I went to the University of Rochester, and I lived for 8 years in Washington, D.C. And I actually worked for an animal rights group in Washington. I was the media director for a group called Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, otherwise known as by their acronym PCRM.
PCRM.
I did that for about 4 years, and then I decided to go to graduate school for philosophy, and I went to Texas A&M. And I did that for 2 years, and somehow I'm still in Texas, 25 years later.
Yeah, so I mean, you really, I'll credit you. I mean, I think you're the reason why so many people left San Francisco, Los Angeles, call it most of California. I think ex-Californians are probably the most populated subset in Texas. What's your experience like?
Oh gosh, I mean, when I meet somebody who's new here and I ask where did you move here from, two out of three times it's, oh, I moved here from California. And it's just something about this city, Austin, which is just very appealing to people who have gotten tired of Los Angeles and San Francisco. I'm not quite sure what it is. Maybe they look at Austin, they sort of feel like Austin's a smaller version of the city they're in, so it'd be more manageable and less expensive. But I mean, yeah, go ahead.
With better live music, superior food, and generally lower taxes. I think those are maybe some draws. But
maybe a draw, yeah.
So you have a very eclectic background, and you touched on it, but how did you get involved initially in the nonprofit sector?
Well, after college, I started reading animal rights literature, and it really spoke to me. I agreed with it. I started with Peter Singer's book, Animal Liberation. I read Tom Regan's book, The Case for Animal Rights, Evelyn Pluhar's book, Beyond Prejudice, David DeGrazia's book, Why Animals Matter. All of these books really meant a lot to me. And so that's what got me, believing in the idea that animals have rights. And as I say, I worked in a nonprofit as the media director of PCRM. This was, by the way, before the internet. So everything started to change soon after I left, and the internet was invented. I sent out press releases by fax. It just got to be difficult because I sort of felt like there's not much I could say to really change people's values. I mean, that's the hard thing about being an activist.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
Nobody knows. If anybody could figure out exactly how to change people's values, that person would be very successful and very rich. You can, as the old expression goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can show people what you believe and try to set a good example, but there's no guarantee that people will agree with you. And so activism for me, I kind of burned out on it after several years. And then I went into a different career. After graduate school, I went into sports research and journalism. And I always thought I would come back to animal rights activism if I could find a niche that meant something that nobody else was doing. And I could give you the background about, it was now about 6 years ago. I've been investing in mutual funds for years. And about 6 years ago, I suddenly realized, wait a second, I'm putting my money into mutual funds, which own shares in the very companies that are producing the products that I'm boycotting as a consumer.
Yeah.
What am I doing? It was like a light bulb went on over my head. And I suddenly realized, wait a second, I'm giving these companies far more money on the investment side than I'd ever be giving them on the consumption side.
Oh, that's yeah. I mean, I think that's a common issue. People can voice concerns publicly, but I think where they put their dollars has more influence on things. So
it really
you
does.
discovered that.
Yeah, and I think I've often wondered, like, why do people? Well, first of all, not all vegans have money to invest. I mean, so that's not some of them. This is an issue.
Oh, it's only like, I think 88.5% that are billionaires. I'm just teasing.
Oh yeah, right. Well, no, I'm not one of them. But the thing is, yeah, it all has to do with direct ethics and indirect ethics. When an animal product is sitting in front of you on the plate, and your decision whether to consume it, there's a direct connection to the action. But with investment dollars, it's all taking place far away from you, and there it's far more indirect. Your impact is indirect, and a lot of people simply don't relate to ethics in an indirect way. They don't think about how a seemingly innocuous action, can have huge impact way down the line, way out of your field of view. And so that's really the reason that I had this sort of blind spot for so many years, and why so many people still do, is that investments you don't really think about where your money is going and what it's doing.
No, I mean, so you had this light bulb moment where you kind of connected the dots. You're like, my money is not following my ethics, but it spoke to you in a way where it motivated you to change. But before that, I mean, had you been a vegan? You mentioned this literature, but what kind of, I guess, cultivated this passion you had?
Well, I mean, just as I say, the belief in that the arguments for the rights of animals were correct. I mean, and I could go into that now, but that would take up the rest of the show.
Well, I'd love to have you another. Yeah, we can get into that. But
if I come on another time and talk about that. So I started as an ovo-lacto vegetarian because I thought, well, I can't give up cheese. Cheese is just too hard to give up. Sure. And I think there's been a lot of other people who had that problem in the 90s. And eventually I sort of gradually moved into veganism. It's very hard. I mean, I'm not very good at convincing my friends and family to become vegan. Some people, I hear sometimes people's stories about how the people they've converted. I converted this person and I converted that person. I've never been any good at that. So I try to do something that will make a difference. And Cruelty Free Investing, I think it has made a difference. Look, when I started this project 6 years ago, there were no vegan.
Wait, sorry, I want to.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
No, you've said so many important things. I sort of want to. I have all these questions. So, most people, you realize, okay, my money is not going where my morals are.
Yeah.
And they might reallocate. Great. That's not you. You then started this whole.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you started Cruelty Free Investing. Like, give us the story there, please, because I think that's fascinating.
Sure, right. Well, when I had this light bulb moment, the first thing I did was I went online and I tried to find vegan investments, and I was stunned to find that there weren't any. There were no vegan mutual funds. There were no vegan exchange traded funds. There was nothing. And so then I have a financial advisor in New York, and I told him, I've decided I don't want to invest in companies that are producing the products which I hate. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, that's fine. Just give me a list of all the companies that are doing that. and then every time I buy stock for your account, I'll just cross-check the list and see if the company I was going to buy was on that list, and if I won't buy it if it's on the list. I said, okay, that's fine. I was certain that such a list existed. Well, of course, as you know, Matt, no such list existed until I created it. So I decided, look, if nobody else is doing it, I'm going to do it. Apparently, by the way, after I created Cruelty Free Investing, I talked to somebody who had worked at PETA like 20 years ago. And he said that PETA considered a project like this and decided not to do it because they thought it would be too much work.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of work. I mean, fortunately, I was able to farm out a lot of the research to other people. Like, I couldn't have done all the research on my own. There's just too many companies.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, you had a background in journalism. Were you able to kind of employ some of those skills when you were scrubbing these companies, or
No, not really. I mean, it really is just a matter. It's just one of these things that just takes up a lot of time. I mean, usually the answer about whether a company is exploiting animals or not is right there on their website.
it
You just
says
look
we
at
exploit animals?
well, it doesn't say that, but
Okay.
you can look at the business plan and look at what they're doing, and you can get a sense of whether they're doing it or not. I mean, in fact, according to the law, if they're actually experimenting on animals, they have to actually put an animal welfare certification or something on their site, saying some sort of declaration that they're abiding by, the federal law for animal welfare. So it's just a matter of just going through. There's about a little over 5,500 publicly traded companies on the three major stock exchanges, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, and American Stock Exchange. Look, we haven't even attempted to do all the foreign companies because there's just way too many. I mean, I get emails once about every few months saying, "What about this company on the Swiss Stock Exchange? And what about this company on the London Exchange?"
There's one in Frankfurt. I know they're up to no good.
Right, and I say, yeah. I mean, if I had way more money and time, I could probably do all of those exchanges too. But it's just too much to do. So I'm just focusing on America. And I hope somebody in Switzerland or somebody in Germany and England will do the same thing I've done. And of course, we have to update this list every year because companies merge, the business plans change, companies go out of business. So every year, once a year, we go through the list and add new companies, remove some old ones, change our ratings. Also, there's also a gray area. There's some places where, and it's hard to say whether whether a company is really exploiting animals or not. It's kind of they're doing it, but they're doing it indirectly. So we've drawn the line between sort of direct exploitation of animals and indirect exploitation of animals. And I give you an illustration of that. For example, a bank. If you open an account at a bank and give them your money, they may take that money and then loan it to a company which does exploit animals. But we've decided to classify all banks and financial institutions as non-exploitative because they're not the ones doing it.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, you could argue, and some people in emails have argued that should count as exploitation. And maybe that's a reasonable argument. I don't really agree with it. I think you have to draw the line somewhere. In some respect, look, everything is indirectly, in our society, is indirectly related to animal exploitation in some way.
Right. Or I mean, like Ford can make a car and you can use that to save an animal. You can use it to run over a person. I mean, you could use it. I mean, it's just a tool. Yeah.
Right. So that's where we draw the line between direct and indirect exploitation. What's very gratifying to me is that I think, once every few weeks, maybe about once a month now, I get an email from somebody who has found the website for the first time. And by the way, it's crueltyfreeinvesting.org.
.org, yeah.
.org was we're a nonprofit. And the person will say, "Oh, I'm so glad you compiled this list. This is so useful to me. I'm sending this to my financial advisor." I've even gotten emails from financial advisors themselves thanking me for doing this because they have a client that asked about this, and they didn't have the financial advisor themselves don't have time to do all this research. I mean, it took us months and a staff of several people to actually go through each of these companies. The average financial advisor doesn't have the time to do that. So we're saving people time and effort by doing the research for you, and the information is all free on our website. As I said, I tend to go off on tangents, so let me throw it back to you.
I mean, you're in another life, Dave. I worked as a rep for a registered investment advisor, and we had lots of clients, and impact investing was kind of burgeoning, I guess. It wasn't what it is now. This was a while ago. And, it was one of those things, we just didn't have the bandwidth. When people said and we had requests like this, and we had a Rolodex of folks, and we would, give them names, and then we essentially had to outsource it because we knew we couldn't do a good job. But you were the one that could have saved me a lot of time had I met you earlier. But I'm glad I met you now. But what did you do? Like, it's a nonprofit. I mean, what were you doing to help keep the lights on in your own place? Like, how did you balance the two?
Well, I at this point I'm semi-retired. I mean, I made a lot of money in other things, and so at this point I'm supporting this project myself. It's just
so it's really a passion project, yeah.
That's what it is.
And we want to highlight the work you're doing for Cruelty Investing, but audience wants to know what did you do that allowed you to be in this position?
Well, I mean, that's kind of personal. I don't really talk about that.
Well, you did something that helped you, and
Yes.
we'll leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah, leave it at that. Yeah, I mean, as I said, for investing, I mean, we were talking about conscious investing and people who care about where their money is invested. The most common type of sort of so-called, ethical investing is investments funds which do not invest in alcohol, tobacco, or firearms.
Right.
Those are the three things that the most people want to get out of their portfolio. The second most common is environmental funds. But for those of us who care about animal rights, you need to be very careful with that, because a lot of environmentalists do not care about animal rights. I think what I've cited is an environmentalists care about the species as a whole, but not about the individual members of a species. So they don't care if you're killing individual members of a species, they just don't want the species itself to go extinct. So I've met a lot of people who are involved in animal rights, and they said, oh, well, I put my money into an environmental fund. And I said, have you ever looked closely at the companies that fund is invested in? You might not like it. So yeah, environmental funds are a step in the right direction, but if you care about animals, they're really not much better than the typical fund.
Okay, well, that's helpful. And I learned of you, Dave, through a friend, Claire Smith. I'm not sure if you know her, but she for those who don't, great woman. She runs Beyond Impact, or Beyond Investing. There are a few categories, and I learned of her because her fund was doing very well, and she competes with purely profit-driven funds. And so she kind of has the opportunity or challenge, however you want to frame it, of kind of blending what she's passionate about, which is animal advocacy and cruelty-free investing, with what she's good at professionally, in generating returns. Not everyone, obviously your group probably has more of the animal rights bend, but how do you appeal to folks out there who maybe aren't as, die hard yet, on the animal issue, but to at least get, to consider the companies that you list?
Well, I mean, that's a hard question to answer, because I'm not involved in the advocacy of it. I'm not going out telling people what they should care about.
You're not knocking on their door saying,
not
buy this, don't buy.
Because as I said earlier, I'm not very good at that. So I'm going to try. I mean, we're catching people who already care about it. I think if some PETA or some other organization has managed to make you care about this, and then we're there for you once you care, and you want advice on helping to tailor your investments to an ethical way. By the way, I think PETA itself does have a page about ethical investing, and they on the bottom of the page they explain how ethical investing is so important, and then at the bottom they say investors need to do their research to make sure they're not investing in the wrong companies. Well, as I said before, the research takes an awful lot of time, and the average investor, the average financial advisor doesn't have the time to do it. The average investor doesn't have the time to do it, which is why which is where we come in. And by the way, you mentioned before animal welfare. I've had a long argument in my own head about the difference between animal welfare and animal rights. As I assume, Matt, you're familiar with, there are people who care about animal rights who think that the whole animal welfare movement is bogus, and then they don't care about it. And then they're, for those of you maybe who watch and don't know the difference, animal rights is the idea that animals shouldn't be used at all. Animal welfare is the idea that it's okay to use animals as long as we keep the conditions they're living in fairly decent, a larger cage.
It's kind of the one bad day argument.
Well, what is that?
Well, I'm sure I'm not giving it exact justice, but I from my understanding, Dave, there's a group of people, I guess, animal welfare advocates who might eat out or whatever, but they'll say like they want them to live as healthy and wonderful a life as they can
until the day we kill them. Right.
Until the day they kill them. So that's they have one bad day.
Right. That's what the Humane Society is doing. And the Humane Society is the largest animal organization in the country. I mean, they have more members than PETA because more people are in that camp. That it's okay to use animals, but we should do it humanely. I mean, I'm going much farther than that. I mean, I believe that it's morally wrong to use animals and under any circumstances. And that's, by the way, an answer to a question that I get a lot. Some people say, well, why don't you like highlight companies which are using animals but doing it in a, in an especially nice way? And my answer is twofold. First of all, I can't trust what a company says about how they treat their own animals. Every company in the world has an incentive to lie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if they're treating the worst animal abusers are saying that they're treating their animals well. And I've always been very skeptical about, something's, humanely raised, they stamp something on a package of meat and humanely raised, and people think, oh, well, that's terrific. No, I don't trust that. Look, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, does not have the funds to go around inspecting all of these farms to see whether they're actually treating their animals humanely. So it's all just self-reporting, and it's self-reporting that I don't trust. But look, even if I did trust it, I still think it's morally wrong to use the animal, whether they're doing it in a nice way or not. So, so we don't make any distinction in terms of animal welfare. We don't like put companies on one side, on the non-exploitative side, because they're have been received awards for animal welfare. The distinction is one along the lines of animal rights, about whether if a company uses animals in any form, they're on the list, the exploitation list. But let me point out something that's important to people. Only 1/4 of the companies, of the publicly traded companies in America, are on our exploit list. 3/4 are not. And that's very important because it shows that you can have a balanced portfolio. The advice people always give about investing is you have to diversify. Diversify. Right. And which is important advice. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, to use another animal-related metaphor. You don't want to put all of your money into a single sector of the economy, because that sector could conceivably go bad. So you want to diversify, and you can diversify in an ethical way. I mean, look, you're obviously, agriculture companies are out. You can't invest in those companies. You can't invest in biotech companies because most of those companies are, either experimenting on animals. And by the way, here's another little trick that some of these companies use. They say, oh, we don't experiment on animals, but they do is they farm that work out to another company. So they rely on the data that comes from another company doing the research that they don't want to bother doing themselves. So it's very tricky. You might think, oh, well, they don't, they're right there on the website. It says we don't experiment on animals. Well, yeah, but they're using other companies' experiments. So biotech is out. A lot of yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for you, but after chatting with Claire, I've kind of, my eyes have been open to maybe it's like Beyond Meat, where I've seen companies in the synthetic biology space where they can use yeast and other forms to create lots of compounds. And they call themselves biotech companies, but would that fall under your?
No, not all biotech companies are.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Most of them do. I didn't mean everyone. If I implied that, that wasn't what I intended to imply. Most of them do. Right, not all.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then for the audience out there, like who are interested in cruelty-free investing, but again, this might be their first exposure to it, Dave. So, what are some of the services? What is it, and maybe what isn't it?
Well, we're not giving advice on what companies to invest in. You see, and for a very good reason, because we would be breaking the law if we did.
Yeah, and you have to register. It would be expensive. Yeah, you don't want to.
You have to be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You have to take, classes on how to be
Series 65. Yeah, we don't have to get into that, but there's a whole slew of licensing exams.
Right. So we're not licensed. So what we're doing is we're giving people the tools, the information that they can use to make more ethical decisions. We're not telling people what companies to invest in or what not to invest in. And even if we did, it would be useless because why would people necessarily trust our advice? But we're giving people the information that they need. If you want to tailor your own portfolio, you can go through our list and pick out companies which seem appealing to you, and on the non-exploit list, or if you want to, if you'd rather have a financial advisor do that, most people would rather do that because most people just feel like they don't know enough about the subject to risk their own money that way. And a financial, you could just send our website address to the financial advisor, and the financial advisor can use it. By the way, if you go to crueltyfreeinvesting.org, every company, every publicly traded company is listed in alphabetical order, and each one is a clickable link. So you can click on the name of the company and then see what the company does and see how they do or do not exploit animals. The whole list is also downloadable you can download a whole file that includes the list of all companies which do or do not exploit animals. And you talked about Claire Smith before. She started the Vegan Climate Fund, which is my understanding is it's mostly kind of like an index fund. It tracks the market. So the market goes up, it goes up. When the market goes down, it goes down. And it's basically a sampling of different companies from our non-exploit list. I think Claire did say that she found our list useful when she was creating the fund.
Yeah, I mean, I know she likes your organization a lot because I think she mentioned it on the podcast, but since then she's brought it up to me. And obviously you helped create this organization, but what does it become? Because it's definitely not just you anymore. There's a whole long list of people involved with cruelty investing. What is it now?
I wouldn't say it's a long list. I've got a few people who are helping me. The situation has changed since we started, and not just because Claire started her exchange traded fund, but there's also another fund, the Veg Tech Invest Fund. That's a more experimental fund, which is trying to invest in companies, more startup companies who are developing new products. So I would say that's a riskier fund because it's not dealing with well-established companies. Some of the companies on that portfolio might fail, but they probably will fail.
Right.
But if you care about promoting non-animal alternatives, Elizabeth Alfano is the woman who runs that. I assume you probably had Elizabeth on your show, right?
Not yet, but we're working on it. So
you gotta get her on the show.
Yeah. Well,
she has her own podcast, by the way, and I've been on her podcast.
Okay.
And she created the Veg Tech Invest Fund, and that's another. And by the way, you can find a link to that fund and Claire Smith's fund on our website. And we also, another thing I want to tell your listeners is that if you go to you can navigate to a tab on our website which lists financial advisors around the country, about a dozen of them, who care about animal rights and who have experience creating portfolios of companies for their clients regarding animal rights. So if you don't know who to hire as a financial advisor, you can look at that list and find somebody you like and trust that list is going to include people who have researched this subject before and who use our website.
That's a great resource, and I'd like to get your thoughts on entrepreneurs out there. As you know, raising capital is never easy, but I'm sure there's entrepreneurs who share many of your beliefs, and they want to create a company that doesn't exploit animals, but they need to get attention. What advice do you have for those people?
That's another hard question to answer because I haven't been an entrepreneur myself, and so I've never been in the position of having to try to raise money that way. I have a friend here in Austin who runs a company called BioBQ, which is trying to create so-called cell-cultured or cultivated meat. They're trying to create a brisket from cells, and
that's cool.
And it's terrific. And look, that's the future. I mean, people ask me what's the end game of this. I've never been convinced that we're going to be able to turn everybody into animal rights activists or vegans, but the idea of growing meat in a lab, that's where real change can happen if they can ever get to a point where they can do it in a cost-effective way.
That's
you don't like that?
No, I love it. I love it. Okay. No, it was funny because when you said that I think that's how I got connected to Claire Smith initially. It's because there's this idea of we use so much resources, and again we could have a whole separate podcast, Dave, on resource allocation. But if you're growing something for humans, but if that something like cows is eating grass or whatever, then you have to use water to grow the grass that eats and then there's animals that eat the grass and then other animals that eat those. There's so many levels of, I'm going to call it supply chain for lack of a better word. If you can go
Yeah.
directly to the final product without using so much land, water, and other resources,
Right.
that's a common denominator that I think has massive appeal. And
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I think then you can get people who are like you, who have a more kind of philosophical animal focus
Right.
bent, aligned with people
Who just care about
who
the
just want to
environment.
care about their, or even
Right.
care about the bottom line. They
Yeah.
want,
Yeah.
but it's doing in a way where you're not castigating those who don't agree with you. You're saying, here's an option where we can all agree. And I don't know, I think that's kind of beautiful.
Yeah. No, it is, and that's really the future. I mean, yeah. Once this sort of, and by the way, they still don't know what to call it. I've heard it called cultured meat or cell cultivated meat or clean meat or
I've heard lab
they,
grown, which I know
yeah,
that I don't
they
love
don't
that.
like
That's
that because they think that that sounds derogatory. Yeah, they don't
or
like the.
cellular agriculture. I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard
I
that too.
mean,
So I don't know what to call it myself because even they don't know what to call it.
it needs a better PR department, but it's cool.
Well, yeah, well, they're working on it. Yeah. I thought maybe to call it bioidentical meat, but then somebody said that that didn't sound very appealing.
Huh.
But
Sounds kind of cool. But
yeah, I thought that was in the idea to get the word identical in there to make sure people know that this isn't going to be some different kind of meat. It's going to be the same meat that comes from an
right.
animal,
Or
but
even
just
like
a little bit of a
light
different way.
free or lower like plant-based meat. Yeah, I mean that's
Well, plant-based meat, that I don't think they could call it
yeah,
that.
that because
That would
that
imply
would
that it's something
confuse it.
that's comprised of plants. Right. But yeah, I mean, I think most people, if they ever end up eating it, will eat it probably not for reasons of animal rights. They'll eat it because the environmental benefits of it are clear. I mean,
Right.
yeah,
I have a
like
call.
land use, no animal waste, no methane emissions. There's a long list of environmental reasons why this growing meat this way will be far superior if they can just get the cost down.
Yeah, and like anything, I mean, I remember in the 80s and early 90s, a personal computer was like what, $20,000, $30,000. And now an iPhone has way more computing power than anything we had,
Right.
decades ago. So it with expansion, with capital investment, I think there will be economies of scale. And
Yeah.
to me, it seemed like magic. I mean, I've been in the investing world for almost 20 years, and I'm just learning about this. I mean, it's only been the last couple of years I even knew about this, and I think it's so fascinating. And I hope we inspire others to at least look at it, and not even just from an animal point, just from a resource allocation point of view. I think
and I mean the Good Food Institute is the major nonprofit that is pushing alternative ways of growing meat, and as they have said, we put so much money into promoting clean energy, and which is good. Clean energy is, but if we put just even like a fraction of the money we're currently putting into promoting new ways of creating clean energy into creating clean meat, the environmental benefits would be far greater than the benefit you get from clean energy. But people just don't see it that way. So they're hoping that we can get some government investment into developing clean meat, because right now it's all private. And by the way, most of these companies that are developing clean meat, like Upside Foods and my friend's company BioBQ here in Austin, they're not on the stock exchange. I mean, they're just too small.
No. Yeah.
You can't buy stock in them. And so they're taking sort of private investment, sort of venture capital money and that kind of thing. It's not, and that's unfortunate. I wish there were a way for the average investor to put their money into these companies. And Elizabeth O'Hana's VegTech Invest Fund, I think, is the best approach for that. If you do want to promote non-animal alternatives, again, her fund, which is linked from our site, would be a good choice.
Absolutely. And we got to have you back because there's so many other questions I have,
Sure.
But we are constrained.
But all right.
You've done a lot of impressive things in your time here on Earth. What are one or two things in your career, points in your career that you're particularly proud of, Dave?
Well, I mean, I think, oh gosh. I mean, you talking about in terms of animal rights or just overall?
Just in your career. It can be, or it can be.
Well, okay, this has
else.
nothing to do with animal rights, but I'm a huge soccer fan, and for many years I collected videos of old soccer games, and in a room I have over there, I have the largest collection of historic soccer videos in the world. But in America, I don't know about the world. I can't say it, but at least it's the largest in America. And so I'm proud of that and developing this huge collection of soccer videos. And when I die, all of those videos are going to go to the Soccer Hall of Fame in Frisco, Texas. And so so someday they will collect my archive. So I've dedicated, strangely enough, I've dedicated a lot of portion of my life to preserving the history of the game of soccer in America. And I'm proud of the work I've done in that. And in terms of animal rights, I'm proud that I've been able to provide an investment guide that is of real value to people who want to avoid investing in companies that exploit animals. So I'm proud of that. And yeah, is that enough?
Oh, that's more than okay. My oldest son is a huge soccer aficionado. So
what's his favorite team?
Well, anyone with Messi at the moment. I should say his favorite team is the one he plays on. He's on a traveling team.
Oh, okay. How old is he?
He's 10, and he's been playing it really since he can walk. And it's only been the last couple of years where he's really gotten into it. But I was too uncoordinated to be a halfway decent soccer player, but I love watching him out there. It's one of my favorite things. Well, I want to know, Dave, and sure. This is I like to ask all the guests who join the program this. What are you most optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about sort of cell-grown, lab-grown meat. I think this could be a real game changer. And by the way, I've also become more cynical on the idea that activists and groups like PETA can change people's minds. I mean, I don't mean to blame PETA about this, but I don't really think they're changing many people's minds. And not because they're not trying; they are trying, but it's just whatever techniques they're using, it just don't seem to work. What will work is allowing people to continue to eat meat, but doing so in a responsible and a sustainable way. I'm optimistic that will happen. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. I think it'll happen. I think it's more like probably decades away. Mm-hmm. But you and I are young enough that maybe we'll live to see it. We'll live to see a day where people walk into a grocery store and buy meat that does not come from an animal that was lived confined on a factory farm. I'm optimistic that will happen someday, and maybe even in our lifetime.
I love what you said, because it's the old saying that we all want to change someone else's minds, but not our own. And if you can promote tactics that are giving options, then I think you're creating an environment for change, and doing so in a peaceful manner. There's less finger pointing, and I can't support that. That
and the finger pointing, I would point my finger more if I felt it worked. I don't know if someone think it worked. That's the problem with finger pointing.
You're very wise. Well, Dave Wasser, thank you so much for joining our program. I hope to have you back soon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I had a good time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.